Like the addition of the bandana to cut down on the super intense bald head glare. Start rocking these more. Greetings, fellow Airsoft nerds. I'm James, your favorite Airsoft dad and field manager. Let's talk about making a game. So in this video, this is going to be more specific to how I create and recommend others create games based on a pre-existing idea. I'll do a separate video on how I find like inspiration or more into like the creative process for ideas for games. But in this video, we're starting off with the premise or the idea that you have a concept or an idea for a game. We just have to make it playable based on some things you kind of want to factor in. I think the most important aspect of creating an airsoft game is understanding like what level most of your players are at. For instance, I can barely get rental players to understand that in order to respawn back in, they have to touch a wall. You really want to implement certain controls when you can. I'll kind of go into the specifics of that. These controls should be designed to keep the field balanced and then the game kind of unique. So kind of at all times, no matter how many players you have, you want like a decent level of like almost like a stalemate. You want balance. You must bring balance to the force. Because if it's team versus team, and this and team A is just totally squashing team B, well, you're not creating a fun experience for team B, and because of that, they might not come back, which means you might not get money. I will say the easiest foundation to build a game off of is TDM, Team Deathmatch. It's just this group of players versus this group of players. It's force on force. That's the easiest foundation to do because it doesn't really have a whole lot of rules. Find the people on the other team, shoot them. If you get shot, go respawn, repeat. Think of game design as a flowchart consisting of ifs, whens, and thens. If A happens, then B happens as a result. And when B happens, then this happens as a result of this. It's just a flowchart, that's it. Typically the most common modification is the respawn rule. For instance, medic is just TDM with a respawn modification. Or radio operator, where the person wears the radio pack and the person is the spawn point, so to speak. That's just TDM with a respawn modification. You're not really changing like the drastic fundamentals or the foundation of the game. You're just taking the main concept, changing one aspect of it, boom, brand new game. A win-loss criteria really isn't mandatory because what do you win? Like, cool, you won a game of capture the flag. What is there a prize? Like, what other than like the self-satisfaction that you were a part of something, of some process, and you won, or you were part of it, or okay, I guess that's cool. For the purpose of game creation, a win-loss criteria can help kind of push the game forward into this sort of this forward progress or create challenges. So it can add sort of this spice or this objective or just something to it because you have to do the thing in order to win the game. You don't have to have a win-loss criteria because not everyone is going to play it. For instance, I've had a bunch of capture the flag games where no one cared about the flag, they just wanted to play team deathmatch. I've had players just team deathmatch all day because that was their favorite thing to do. They didn't care about objectives, they didn't care about, no. They just wanted to shoot players in the face and film it all day. Cool, but you have to take that into consideration when you make a game, that you're going to get that also. The only kind of games you can really have with a win-loss criteria is any kind of game with like a quantifiable objective. Capture the flag, great example. I take the flag, run it to my spawn point, and I either win the whole game based off that one capture, or I score a point and whoever has the most amount of points somehow wins. Cool. Ta-da! But it's a quantifiable objective. It's a metric. Team Deathmatch doesn't have winners or losers, unless you have some sort of system in place where you can count how many players have been eliminated. So like in laser tag, in laser tag you can do a quantifiable TDM because it has a way to track points and hits and gives you analytics and all that. Airsoft, you don't really have that. Like a 40 on 40 game of Team Deathmatch, you're just playing for the sake of playing and enjoying the game. There's no real winning or losing. Respawn modifications are probably the easiest games to create pending your field's layout. So is the respawn location or player driven? Location driven respawns are probably the most common in most of your weekend fields. You have to go here, maybe, touch the wall or touch the barrel or go to the corner, and boom, you're magically alive again. Or if you have games like Medic, for instance, there's no physical respawn location, it's the player. It's the player that has to come to the person, and then they perform whatever act that, heals the player, makes them playable again. Cool. But that's not location specific, it's player specific. When you're creating a game with a respawn modification, can any aspect of that modification change? Can opposing players impact this? For instance, if I have multiple static respawn locations throughout the map, can the opposing team capture any of those respawn points? Or if you're playing medic, can the medic get killed? Maybe the medic can't get killed, but the medic has no gun. Maybe the medic gets a gun but can be killed. Maybe you run multiple medics and only the medics can heal each other. But if the medics are down, then you can end the game, or it's like, single death elimination kind of a thing. So you look at the thing and you think of, how can this be changed? Can players impact this? Can I impact this in any way? If I want a regular TDM and I just want to sort of change the way they respawn, how am I going to do that? And what's all the little aspects, the little sub questions that I need to figure out? Again, it's a flowchart. All right. I have medic. Medic is TDM with a respawn modification. This player has to heal you. Okay. What if that person is shot? Can that person heal? What are the specifics of that person? Do they have to physically touch a player for 3 seconds? Are we using bandages? Like, how are we doing? There's so many little sub questions in there, but I mean, that's probably the easiest way to modify a game. How you pick teams is another way you can change a game, and you don't have to modify the respawn rule, you just change the teams around. Puppy Hunt, great example. It's usually 17 and under versus 18 and over. Cool, that's how you pick teams. Ta-da, ready, set, go. Standard Puppy Hunt TDM, unlimited respawns, your normal respawn points, blah, 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 blah. Cool. Or if there's way more 17-year-olds than adults, okay, well then we'll have it 19 and under versus 20 and over, and you can sort of change that around. Another way you can do it is Reynolds versus everyone. So let's say you have 60 rental players and 30 self-equipped players, or 30 regulars. Cool, then that may or may not be balanced. So let's say you also have 20 rentals and 30 normal players. Okay, we'll pick 5 of your most experienced folks, give them rental guns, put them on the rental team, and balance it out that way. But you don't have to change the respawn rule, you're just changing how you pick teams. You can combine the two. So you can take a normal TDM, modify the respawn, and modify the teams as well, and create a single game out of that. That's what I like to call Scav Hunter. So Scav Hunter is basically Reynolds versus everyone. Scavs are Reynolds, PMCs are everyone else. However, PMCs only have one life. When they get hit, they have to return to spawn and wait for the next round. Scavs get unlimited respawns and have multiple respawn points. So my field is like one big rectangle. So in each corner is what we usually use for a static respawn point. PMCs only get that one respawn point. Scavs get 3 different points they can respawn from, and they have unlimited lives. It doesn't really matter how good the players on the PMC team are, because at some point, just by sheer numbers, PMCs are going to get outgunned because they can only get hit once and then they have to go wait for the respawn. So I'll usually play like 3 rounds of that. The way I judge when to start a round is either a time standard, so I'll do no more than about 2-minute rounds, and I'll usually run 3 rounds like that. Or if I see that an overwhelming number of PMCs are standing around respawn waiting to go, I'll just blow the whistle, have everyone reset, ready, set, go, round 2. But I've modified the respawn rules, and I've changed the teams up as well. But it's still at its core just team deathmatch. It's still these folks versus these folks. In Scav Hunter, the respawn rule is the control. So the respawn rule is what keeps it from getting too one-sided. And by one-sided, I mean Reynolds don't typically sweep an entire, non-rental team. Usually it's the other way around. Usually if you do strict Reynolds versus everyone else, usually those Reynolds are going to get crushed in 45 seconds, depending on the size of your field. So this is the control mechanism that I use to maintain balance within that game, and it works very well. Give it a try. We have another game called Purge, which combines both of these aspects, sort of. So in Purge, it's just standard TDM and free-for-all, and we go back and forth. I use two different distinct sounds. So a whistle starts and stops the whole game as a whole, but we have a foghorn, like a that switches the purge on. That's the purge alarm, basically. So we blow the whistle, starts as a normal TDM game, force on force. When we blow the foghorn and all my refs yell purge, 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 then it turns into a free-for-all. So if if you and your team, your little squad or whatever, just go totally dominate this one area and we blow the foghorn, well, teams win away. So your squad's about to shoot each other and it's funny. And then we blow the horn again. Refs yell team deathmatch, team deathmatch. So if you get shot in the purge, you go back to your respawn and then you just wait for the purge to stop, basically. So it's still kind of that same Scav Hunter style where if you get shot, you go back to respawn and wait. Does that make sense? So it just flip-flops back and forth between a normal team deathmatch and a free-for-all. And we'll play that for 10 minutes, blowing the horn every, 30 seconds to a minute. It usually goes by pretty quick, but players love Purge. We debuted it, today's the 27th of July. I think we debuted it early July, and it was an overwhelming success. We always have players DMing us and physically asking us to feel like, yo, when are we going to play Purge? That's a real popular game for us, and it's also real simple because there's no win-loss criteria, and there's really no way that one team can dominate the other because sometimes there are no teams. So it's a real good way to keep balance. So let's say no matter what you do, no matter what's going on, one team is always dominating the other. Okay, switch it up. Run a purge game. Depending on your definition of a control mechanism, it could be seen as a control because there's no way that it could be overwhelmingly one team winning versus the other because sometimes there are no teams. So that could be a form of control, I guess. But usually when you think of a control, you want to think of how do I keep one team from dominating the other, and in that context, usually the teams stay the same. So kind of depending on your definition, it could be a control mechanism. Those examples I just gave you shouldn't cost you anything. It just takes a little creativity, a little effort on your part, but most fields have whistles and bullhorns and other sort of distinct sounds so that, one sound means one action, one sound means a separate action that they can use. Where it starts to get real pricey for a field is when you start to implement props. When you start adding props, games can be a little bit more advanced, they can be a little bit more objective based, and sometimes depending on how you form your rules, that prop or that objective can in itself be a control mechanism. Generally, a prop-based game will require a specific item, which is typically directly tied into the win-loss criteria. You can have win-loss criteria, prop-based games, and non-win-loss criteria. So Capture the Flag, classic example of a prop-based win-loss criteria game because the prop is the flag. You take the flag to whatever the point scoring location is, usually it's like your base or your respawn, boom, you win the game. That is prop-based. It doesn't matter how many players are shot in the Capture the Flag game, that's irrelevant. What matters is taking the flag from its point, returning it back to your base, boom shakalaka, you win. An example of when a prop-based game is not directly tied to the win-loss criteria can be how you work medic. For instance, on my milsim days, I have variations of medic where instead of the medic healing a player by placing their hands on a player, the medic has to apply a player-provided bandage. But this requires the player to bring that item that qualifies as a bandage. If a player does not have this item, they bleed out after 30 seconds, and then they just respawn as normal. This allows any player to participate in the game. It just makes it a little bit harder for the player, and as such, it'll make it a little bit harder for their team. In these particular games, most of the players that go to my milsim days already are familiar with this. They know the rules. They know what items they kind of need to bring. They know they don't need to bring those rules. It just makes their day easier. And a lot of them have been to Lion Claws or Milsim West or DFE. A lot of these players have already been to events, So they're already used to that bandage rule because that's pretty much how milsim events get down anyway. You have to bring bandages. On the business side of the house, if you don't have like an ace bandage or a milsim west tourniquet, you can use the armbands that we use for making teams. So we have green and orange Velcro armbands. You can use those items as a bandage because the player, the customer, is already going to have that anyway. And if they don't, cool, it's $4 a pair. Ta-da. But in that meta game, the respawn rule is the control. So if you have some little speedy kid that sweeps all the way across the field by themselves and gets shot, they have to wait for a medic or wait 30 seconds and then go back and respawn. So that respawn rule in a medic game is a control mechanism. Bomb defusal games are probably the most common example of a prop-based game with a win-loss criteria and a decent control mechanism. But right now, so many places are sold out of what I would describe as a good bomb. And if you cheap out on a bomb prop, it just sort of waters down the experience and looks like really, really janky. Depending on how you write your rules for a bomb defusal, there's no real control mechanism necessarily, but there is a win-loss criteria. So like if you're doing a standard CS style attack and defend, or like a CT versus terrorist kind of a thing, there's not really a control, but if you have the bomb playable to anyone, it can be a small control because so many people are going to be focused on getting the bomb versus like trying to get a sweep or getting, usually objective-based games do a decent enough job of implementing a control on your field that it can usually give a good balance to a field's game, depending on how you write the rules. I stole grind from COD and turned it into an airsoft game. You started with 2 armbands, and when you got shot, you took one of those armbands off and dropped it. The other player would then collect that armband, take it back to their respawn point, drop it, the armband in a bucket, basically. Or if they see like their teammates get shot, they can shoot the player that shot them and take the opposing player's armband and then take their teammate's armband back to their base and then deny points to the other team. Because in grind you could do that. So I basically took grind from COD and used armbands. That was also back when we gave armbands out for free. We stopped doing that. So what I might start doing and what I'm looking at doing is using like Velcro flags from flag football and just handing them out because almost everyone has some sort of Velcro-y thing anyway. So they just maybe, hang them on their arm or hang them off their kit or something like that. But that is basically TDM with a prop-based win-lose criteria. NPCs or neutral characters can sometimes be a fun thing to throw in there. They kind of fall under that prop category, but they're people, not objects, so that's really rude. Usually staff, in fact, it probably should be staff, or an experienced player that you trust should be assigned to that role. Best example I can give you is Juggernaut. So it's a normal TDM, but we have a Juggernaut character, which is Ethan, who's a staff member, and he dresses up in like this really cool armored costume and walks around and melee kills players with like a big LARP sword and a big LARP foam, like a Warhammer kind of a thing. We play this one of 2 ways. It's either player directed or Ethan directed. Player directed means he can be recruited to a team by tapping this bell that he has on his back, and then the player that taps the bell tells him what team he's on, and he'll go fight for that team until someone from the opposing team rings his bell. Then he goes just kind of back and forth like that. That's player directed. Ethan directed is where he just sort of roams around and does what he wants at will. We use Ethan directed as a control. So if one team is like super pushing on the right side and it's starting to not really look very balanced, then I'll just tell Ethan, hey dude, go to the right side and mess all those kids up. He'll just plow right through the right side, tap all those players, and they all have to go respawn, and then we tell those kids to push up. So Juggernaut can be used as a really good staff-directed control mechanism to ensure that there's balance within the force. Usually anything involving someone that needs to be rescued is like this also. So we used to take a couple staff members, put them in like big green jumpsuits, and then they would just wait for someone to come rescue them. So you could do that a couple ways. So you either have someone physically like grab a hold of them if you wanted to go, or if you wanted to like avoid physical contact, if they were in like an arm's reach, then they could verbally direct them to follow me, and the staff members pre-briefed like, hey, once they get within an arm's reach, just take all commands from them. Ta-da! If you don't have the staffing and you don't really trust the players to play the role effectively, like I do, you can also use dummies, in which case you would just regulate how the dummies can be carried. So you can't just grab them by the collar and pull them across the dirt. You have to like carry them on your shoulder, or you can implement like a 2-person carry rule. So you have to have 2 people carry the dummy, not just one. Really, hostage rescue is just capture the flag. You've just changed what the objective looks like and called it something else. Which brings me to my next point. The name of a game actually has a lot to do with how excited a player will get. I like to take aspects from video games, so like Scav Hunter, okay, gee, where did that come from? Grind, oh wow, I wonder where I've played that game before. Because it's easily recognizable and it can help players kind of understand, based on if they play the video game or not, kind of what to expect. No one wants to play on the speed field. No one wants to play on the tournament field. But if you tell a bunch of casuals that we're going to do some stuff on the gulag, they lose their minds with excitement. It's the same thing. We just called it something else. The more modifications you use, the more complex a game will get. My quest for Avalon is just domination mixed with medic, and that's the basis of it. At the end of the game, domination points are worth 10 points, and I have a currency, so I have gold coins that you can collect for various reasons, and 1 gold coin is worth 1 point each, and it's an hour long. And if you walk off the field, you can't come back on, because your BBs are limited to what you bring in your magazines and what you can find by securing loot boxes, kind of like Warzone, or Apex also. So that find things and collect things aspect you see in those like Battle Royale style games, I have implemented that as a control. This is why you can't leave and come back, because if you did, well then players would just shuttle BBs back and forth. No. One of the controls I want, so kids are a little bit more conservative with their ammunition and they're not just spamming everywhere, now you have a limited amount of BBs in which to choose from. And you also have to go fight for those BBs because you have to get them from a loot box, which means you have to physically go there, secure the loot box, and bring it back to your commander. Oh, I have class-based things also. But before we start that game, I do about a 20-minute rules briefing on the particulars of that game. I also have an NPC neutral player banker where you can buy certain items that you might need through the game, and during the game you're assigned quests that must be completed in a specific time frame, or you get penalized, and if you get penalized then the opposing team gets rewarded, or the other way around. In a nutshell, that's like 4 or 5 years worth of game creation condensed down into like one YouTube video. That's it. I hope this helps you. If you're a field, I hope you get something out of this. If you're a player, I hope you can come up with something and give it to a field. If you're one of my kids, you can easily think of a game and DM it to me, Discord it to me. I will pay attention to when players give me games. The problem is players suck at making games because they don't know the processes. Okay, well here's the process. Let me know what you come up with.
Caber, who the f*** are you, nerd?